Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining me. I'm very excited to talk to you. We've known each other for a few years now, and probably since sort of quite early days at Sign On Site. Yeah, I'd love to hear firstly about your journey, sort of leading up, I guess, to Sign On Site, and then your Sign On Site journey and how that's been.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Jodie. It's so nice to see you. So, look, my journey, I think, very typical of a founder in that I come from industry. So, my background is in construction management, and that's what I was doing when the founder of Sign On Site, Mitch Harmer, actually reached out to me for some advice on an idea that he had, which basically led into Sign On Site, which was digital construction safety software. So Mitch ran the company for like 5 years, I think, before I came on board. And then I joined in 2019, took over operations. I think Silent Site was at about a million ARR at that point. So Mitch did a fantastic job really being that like early stage founder and proving out that there was market fit and creating this digital construction category. And then, yeah, in 2023, I think I took over as CEO and then led the company actually to an exit in April this year, actually, to One Breadcrumb, who was a major competitor of Sign On Site.
Yeah, brilliant. That's such a good story, and it feels like it was a bit of an overnight success. But really, when you lay it out like that, that's
I
quite a
know.
few years.
So I was like 23 when Sign On Site
Yeah.
actually started, which is crazy. So
And was Mitch at uni or were you at uni? It was something, or
we're
the
both
idea
at
came?
uni.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mitch was at uni. He was doing entrepreneurship, and there were two other people on the founding team, Peter and David, who were both software engineers. And so Mitch lived with them. I think they were all housemates. So
Yeah, right. And
yeah.
so what was the sort of the catalyst that got you to join? What was the advice that you gave? And what hooked you in?
Of course. So, Simon's Up was actually born from a business planning competition in 2013. So, Mitch wanted to do it. I think it was like sponsored by all of the unis in Canberra, which is where we were all living. But he wanted somebody with construction experience. And so he asked me to come in and provide that additional context on their business idea. And I was happy to do that. And then at the end of it, they were like, okay, we're going to turn it into a company now. And I was like, oh, no, thank you. Actually, I've worked so hard for my construction career. I'm not ready to
Yeah.
give that up. And so I just took a very small percentage ownership in the company while they stayed on and did all of that work. And then I said to Mitch that I didn't want to join the company until I felt that there was a role that I could actually do well.
Hmm.
And so when you're an early stage company, you're really looking for people that are very strong in sales or very strong in the technical background. And like my technical background is in construction. So like if you want to know how to like install a dental chair into a building, yeah, for sure I can help you with that. But I cannot tell you anything about software engineering.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really until we were a million and they were trying to figure out like how the actual business of sign on site ran that was where I could add value because obviously I'd had experience with people management, I'd had experience with managing budgets and all of those sorts of more practical things that come with a startup actually becoming more than an idea.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I do remember that now. That's actually really great forward thinking from your perspective. Like especially at such a young age to realize
Right?
there's no point me jumping in here now because what would I actually do with my
No,
skills?
so,
Yeah.
so many founders, I think, like take on roles that because they're just so excited and they want to be so involved that they
Mm,
like jump into roles that they maybe aren't the best suited to. And that's
mm.
such a hard thing because as a founder, like nobody is going to be more passionate than you about your business. But at
Yes.
the same time, you can't overnight learn how to do all of those things incredibly well. So like finding that balance of like when you bring somebody in versus when you do it yourself is such a challenging moment for
Yeah, it
founders.
really is. And I think that's a good milestone and a way of thinking for founders, get it to a certain point where it's a proven, you've got that product market fit, then work out, okay, we've got scope. If we brought these people in, then we would get that scale. Yeah, I see
Exactly.
a lot of ups and downs for founders where they sort of step out of their core competency and bring people in and then it doesn't work out so well. So they've got to change it and step back into that core competency because that's no one does it better than them. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's really
agreed.
interesting. And so then we met through funding, obviously. Was
Mhm.
you were, I think, our very third our third loan
Mhm.
We had two kind of experimental companies, Team Gage and Creatively Squared, that we tested with, and then you guys came along, and actually it was our biggest and third loan ever. And so you're very much one of our very founding customers, and we've been with you on that journey since then, which
Mm.
was 2021, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so which has been great to see all of your growth and the outcome. I'd love to just hear about how you think about funding when,
Of
because you've
course.
used many different types of capital, and so how do you think
Oh,
about it?
yeah. Look, I think a lot of people go into funding with this idea that like, okay, I'm going to hit $1 million in revenue. Well, it used to be that. Now it's like I'm going to get seed funding or pre-seed funding or pre-revenue funding and all those sorts of things. So um, I think a lot of the time you just jump into it that I'm going to get external funding from venture, whether that's like angel all the way through all the different series. But it's something that I didn't pick up until quite late into the sign on site journey was that there was like different capital strategies that you can deploy, and that like a good advisor, like a good incubator or a good accelerator or a good mentor is going to help you write a capital strategy for your business, and that just going out and taking funding at different valuations, like or a high valuation, they have much deeper implications than I think you really at maybe are ready to hear or have considered when you're an early stage founder. And especially if, like me, you're like in your mid 20s and you've never done any of this before and still learning.
Yeah.
Um, and so, like, that took a long time for us to figure out like what was the right capital strategy for us as a business. And we took angel funding, and we made mistakes at that point in terms of like we people were supposed to invest under like a fund and instead invested individually. So then suddenly we had a really busy cap table with lots of small investors, which obviously complicated things for funding into the future and caused issues right up until the point where we were exiting the business. Then we tried shareholder loans, which were great. They're a really good non-dilutive funding type. If you have like consistent cash flow, but you just want to even that out, you can get usually competitive interest rates from your shareholders. It's a lot easier applying to them than applying to a bank. It's
Yep.
a simple process, and we did that a few times. But obviously, there's limits on the amount that your shareholders are willing to loan, especially if they're not seeing returns. On like valuation increases from funding rounds and things like that. So that was very helpful for us during COVID as an example, but I don't think would have been very practical in the later stages of sign on sites funding. So yeah, after that, that's when we joined up with Tractor. So at the time, we were exploring whether to do a funding round, whether to do maybe funding and venture debt, and then obviously Tractor was starting up, and you were sort of really like the first group really actively going out and educating people about revenue-based financing here in Australia. And so we luckily got introduced to you via some of your investors and our investors being the same people
Yes.
in that very typical venture way of being like, oh, I'm invested in both of you.
Yes.
Neat.
Yes.
Um, and so revenue-based financing was a great option for us because we had taken diluted funding at the angel stage. It had been quite challenging. We had taken seed funding as well. So this was before I sort of came on board, but obviously things that I had to deal with later as a CEO, and as a person exiting the business and handling all of that shareholder management. And then I was on board for the revenue-based financing that we did with Tractor, which was a dream. You guys were obviously lovely to work with. Um, full disclosure that the chairman of Tractor also sits on our board. And
That wasn't the case then, I don't think, but
it was, I don't think it was
no, it
actually, but
wasn't. No.
it meant that we always had such a strong relationship with Tractor. And we were so lucky that it wasn't just funding from you guys. So like we took on venture funding from Black Nova. They were our major venture funder up until the final year before we exited. And, between Tractor and Black Nova, who obviously have such a close relationship, and you have the Track Nova webinar series and things like that,
Yeah.
you guys were able to put us in touch with so many resources. So because of the size of loan that we took from Tractor and the fact that we were a Black Nova Portco, I know that you introduced us to Nogga, who introduced me to my personal executive coach, Hannah Yanfield. And I
Oh
know
yeah.
that um, you guys introduced me to Libby Briggs, who took me through and did a load of pitch coaching with me so that I could really confidently go out and raise additional funding for Sign on Site, which frankly I think was only successful because of the work that I did with Libby. And
Wow.
so, introducing us to Gaz from Tractor, who would come in and help us like with advice on how to start newsletters and how to create community. And it was a different level of support that we got from Tractor than I think that we would have gotten if we just gone out and done other shareholder loans. Like we weren't expanding our pool of resources in terms of people who could mentor us and people who could help us. And that was such a good thing about our Tractor funding and then our venture funding from Black Nova was that we got access to all of their networks and all of their growth. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I think that there's some of the hidden bits of value that are really hard to explain to
mm,
founders who haven't been there, done that. But it's all the help along the way. Every single little introduction or help that you get really all adds up.
100%.
Yeah. Um, I'm curious as well. You've very young in your career, but built a scalable business through to the point of an acquisition, which is kind of the dream. Managing a lot of people along the way, and not just teams, but shareholders, stakeholders, co-founders. Like there's a lot of, I guess, people management
Mm,
in that. And I'm
yeah.
just curious about what some of the, if you've got great leadership tips or management styles or things that have worked for you that you could share with our audience that may be struggling with relate all of these things.
Oh, of course. Look, I'll never pretend to be the best at any of this. I don't think that anybody can ever go through all of those funding rounds and all of those years in startups and an exit and think, yeah, I nailed everything. I did
Of course.
everything so well. But the moments that like I felt really proud of what I was doing was the moments when I had created a really high trust team.
Mhm.
So we were really lucky at Sign on Site that we had a small team. So we kept to about 16 people for the final year. And going through an acquisition is incredibly stressful. It is like having a full-time job on top of your full-time job. And when you're like a CEO who is also handling all of the like stakeholder management and all of your shareholder management and doing the day-to-day management of the team and then also doing a funding round, I was just a shell of a person basically
Mm.
for like a year. And so what was so good in that was that I had, for the year before that, since I'd taken over as CEO, spent all of my time investing in the people around me. Like you are never on your own going to make your business successful. It doesn't matter if you are the smartest person in the room, if you are the hardest working person in the room. Like if you can't say to somebody, I hired you into this role because I trust you and because I think that you know best
Mm.
and mean it, you are never going to succeed. And so there were moments where I could like just drop the ball massively with my team because I simply didn't have the hours in the day to be doing that. And that was honestly sometimes better because they had the freedom to make decisions. They knew that I would have their back no matter what that decision was.
Mm.
And that just meant that we performed even during such stressful times. Like our revenue was still growing. Had been growing higher during our acquisition than it was prior to
Oh,
our
wow.
acquisition.
Wow.
So, this high stress environment, when you give people autonomy and trust, they were really able to perform on that. And that was because it wasn't just me having that with each of my executive team members, it was them having it with each other and
Mm.
being actually a high trust team instead of all of these individual relationships. And so finding that really hard to do. Like it's letting your ego aside at every moment to be like,
Mm.
I don't know better than you.
Yeah.
Like I will never know more than you about your topic of choice, no matter how hard I research. If I don't live that experience of being the leader in your space, I'm never going to know it as well as you. And I think a lot of founders don't want to hear that. because they're in a position where they're often going from zero to one on all of these different things, and so you do want to feel like you can step into these really senior roles, and that you can take the company from 1 million to 10 million because you want it so badly. But ultimately, like, it's about the team that you bring in
Mm,
around you and giving them space to actually succeed.
mm. Yeah, that's amazing. And just if I can dig in a little bit deeper on
Mm,
that, when you said the year prior to the acquisition year, you
yeah.
really spent time building a very trust-based team. Like,
Mm,
what were some of the things that you did to
of
do that?
course. So that was like giving a lot of face time to people. So building a like connection and a relationship, because I wasn't the CEO. I didn't hire my executive team.
Mm,
That wasn't done with that wasn't my not it wasn't my choice, but like,
mm, mm.
I
Yeah,
didn't
you
bring in a load
inherited
of
it. Yeah,
friends and things like exactly. I
yeah,
inherited it. And
yeah.
so for me, when you're coming into a team that, you've been peers and then suddenly you're a leader of, it's like, okay, following through on what you actually say that you're going to do,
Yeah.
um, listening to their ideas, and then if you can, funding it. And if you can't fund it, like, figure out ways that you can support it in another way.
Hmm.
Um, and then, like, being in the trenches with them. So,
Yeah.
like, it's very tempting to just sit off to the side and be like, oh, they're doing a terrible job. Like, oh my gosh, that's just, like, I know a lot of founders pick like one team and they're like, if we could just get the marketing team to do better, we would just be succeeding as a business. Or if we could just get CX. And it's like, nah,
Yeah.
if you were in there with them.
Yeah.
So, like, doing grunt work, or just being in tough conversations with them, or listening to them when they're having a bad time, or just showing up when they need somebody to like have an absolute meltdown to, and letting that be you, and
Mm.
going through that with them really helps build trust that, like, you're invested in them
Yeah. Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's brilliant. And how do you balance the sort of trusting them and giving them that autonomy whilst being in the trenches? Or is that
Oh,
in and out thing?
I think that it's like just being publicly like very supportive. So, like,
Mm,
um, I made it very clear to like all of the individual contributors at Sign on Site that their head of department was their head of department, and that I would just be backing their head of department in whatever they decided was the best thing to do in those moments. And I was a resource to their head of department.
mhm.
So, like, if they needed to pull me in on customer calls because that was like what was the most appropriate thing, they had free reign of my calendar. Or if they needed me to come in and do interviews with them because they were absolutely slammed and desperately needed some new senior engineers, then I would step in and interview for them, like being a tool where they can use my skills or my time, in order to make them more effective. I think really showed to them that it wasn't just about me, like, sort of top down being like, and you will succeed. It was me
Yeah.
going, I know that you can succeed. What can I give you to
Yes,
help you do
yes.
that?
Yeah, yeah, great. Yeah, love that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's really awesome, like practical, real experience and advice. And it makes me think of another question,
Of course.
which I wasn't going to cover, but I can't help it.
Go for
And
it.
that is when you said you're a shell of yourself,
Mm,
in that time doing two full-time jobs, and like that's full
yeah,
on. It's stressful as
100%.
well with all that
Oh, yeah.
stakeholder management. Like, because another theme that we talk about a bit, or I try to talk about a bit, is mental health. And so
Mm,
I've spoken about burnout a few times, and
yeah, of course.
like, how did you recover, or what did when you're a shell of yourself?
Oh,
And
I would say I'm deep in recovery at the moment.
yeah,
Honestly. So, like, for
yeah,
me, there were a few things to that. There was like the toll that it took on my mental health, and there was the toll that it takes on your physical health to go through
mm,
something like that. And
yeah,
like, they're not to be separated. They're obviously so deeply
yeah,
tied together. But for me, it very much stemmed across both. Um, and so, like, last year, it was like December, and we were deep in the like funding round, and my partner had just gotten sick, and I had just fallen down the stairs in our house,
oh
and our dog had to go to hospital, and it had just like all
my
happened at
God,
once. And I was just like, I just can't do this. We'd like have to cancel our Christmas trip because we were like in hospital with the dog, and I like couldn't walk anywhere, and it was just
oh,
such a disaster. And I actually just had to be like, all right, I actually can't take care of myself anymore.
Well, this is the universe telling you something, isn't
100%.
it?
It was just like, you need to stop.
Yes.
Um, and so this is like an insanely privileged thing to do, but I actually just like turned to everybody around me and was like, I just need a little break, actually. Like, I'm not handling this well.
Yeah.
And I went to Bali for a week with my partner.
Yeah.
And I had to work during that week, which I hated.
Yeah.
And it like really took me out of the holiday. And I will never forget one of my major investors was like, hey, I'm so sorry that we like ruined your only chance to like have a break. We're going to pay for your holiday. Like we want to reimburse you for it. Um, Sort of thing. And it like it was such a I mean, it was obviously a very kind gesture financially, but it was such a gesture in sense of like feeling supported, like everybody around me seeing that I was like having such a bad time
Yeah.
and that I needed help. And so
Yeah.
like just everybody in my life stepped up together. I started seeing my executive coach more frequently. I started trying to exercise more often. My partner like was like, okay, I control all of the meals in this house. You are not allowed to cook. Like, A, you're a terrible cook, but like you can't eat cereal for dinner. You have to eat veggies. Like, so I think having such a good support network in that moment like really got me through all of that.
Oh,
Hmm,
thanks so much for sharing that,
of
Alex.
course.